Everybody, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, and that's soil. And over the last many years, I've been stumbling my way through trying to form a more thorough understanding of the beautiful intricacies of soil and its dynamic nature. In doing this, I've spent a lot of time reading and even more time thinking. And I'd like to share with you some things that I have learned. And we'll start out with some basics on how soil biology functions based on the availability of oxygen. I say oxygen, but I should probably just say atmospheric gases. We know that oxygen is the primary molecule that seems to be driving some of these, but there's also nitrogen. And anyway, we're going to talk about them. Okay, so over here we have a little chart I made, and I don't know how well you all can see it or how well it'll pick up. But what we have is a column laying on its side. And the only reason why I have it laying on its side is it's easier for me to write on it this way. But anyway, we have this side we're going to call the obligate aerobic side, or the aerobic side. Okay, the obligate aerobic side means that all life that is present in that zone requires oxygen or atmospheric gases to survive. On the other end, we have the anaerobic or obligate anaerobic side. And these are organisms that are not dependent on oxygen. As a matter of fact, they will die in the presence of oxygen because oxygen is toxic to them. And they use a different form of energy production. There's different processes that they use in order to produce the energy they need to metabolize and produce the amino acids and enzymes required for them to thrive. But let's get back to the obligate aerobic zone. So obligate aerobes are just like it sounds. They are obligated on air, right? They are obligated on the presence of atmospheric gases to function, reproduce, metabolize, etc. Okay, now organisms like plants, like us, humans, we all exist in that aerobic zone, right? And fungi exist in that zone. As long as the carbon level is high enough, the fungal, if the moisture content and the carbon level is high enough, the fungal, let me change that up a little tiny bit. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. When it comes to fungi or mushrooms, let's just concentrate on them for half a second here. When it comes to them, they prefer the aerobic side of things for the most part. Bacteria also enjoy some aerobic, there's aerobic bacteria. They like a different food source, but they do eat some of the same food sources as fungi. But fungi really enjoy the complicated sugars, the complicated carbohydrates, the woods, and things that need to be decomposed by fungi. That's what they eat, and that's where this stuff grows, is in the aerobic zone, so that's where they dominate. Now, the levels of bacteria will be declined relative to the number of fungi. Okay, so there will be a fungal dominance that exists in this area if the conditions are right for fungal dominance. If there's a lack of the food that the fungi want, the numbers, of course, will be down. But not to chase rabbits there, but this is not like an absolute in a bottle. If there's more air, there's fungi, because it's very dependent on moisture levels. And we can get into that later on as we talk. But for the time being, obligate aerobes live in the top layer of your soil. Okay? Now, in that aerobic zone, there are more than one type of fungi that live there, right? There's a type called phototrophs, and phototrophs will synthesize sunlight similar to the way plants do, and they will produce energy that they use to metabolize, and they produce it from sunlight. So they exist in the top layer of the soil or your substrate that you're growing in. They also can exist in water. So cyanobacteria are a form of that. Now, as we get further down the column, we come across fewer aerobic bacteria because the oxygen level has decreased. And we come across facultative anaerobic bacteria. Now, facultative anaerobic bacteria are called anaerobic bacteria not because the air or oxygen is toxic to them. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite is true. In the presence of atmospheric gases, the facultative bacteria have an explosion of growth. They can survive in a depleted zone, though. That's what gives them an edge, you might say. So like in areas like the Amazon, where they get a lot of rain and there's a lot of mucky forest, or in the peat moss bogs, facultative anaerobic bacteria would be present. But they're also present in obligate aerobic zones, just in fewer numbers. Now, during different times of the season, you might have an increase of rainfall, right? And this increase of rainfall, or a big leaf fall too. We'll talk about leaves in a second. Now, as the rain falls and it fills the soil, saturates it, right? And the life is happy because water makes life happy. It's necessary. It's one of the key ingredients, air and water. Without them, not much happens. And anyway, so you've got the water. It is now moving through the system. And the facultative are doing their thing throughout this column. They're really active in here as the water starts to start really reproducing, because the aeration is being forced in with the trickulation of the water trickling in. Now, as all that is occurring, as the water is falling, driving the aerated water down into the soil column, the obligate are doing fine and they're reproducing. Now it stops raining and you've got a puddle. You've got some standing water there. The air level starts to reduce as all these organisms, especially the obligate aerobes, are going into hyperdrive because of the amount of water and the amount of new food and all that kind of good stuff that's happened to them. They go into overdrive. But now the oxygen levels are going down. So they only are going to survive closer to the surface. They're going to start dying off. And the column that they lived in, as they die off, they're going to leave behind a lot of food for the facultative microbes to come up and to be able to eat, right? Because remember, life feeds on life. So these obligate aerobic bacteria have lived their life cycle out, harvesting and utilizing oxygen as a source of energy for all their cellular processes, and now they are in photosynthesis, and now they have the phototropes won't die until until it dries off, and as the water recedes, they get sucked into the column and they start to die. And anyway, but that's irrelevant. We're talking about just the aerobics, not the phototrophic aerobic bacteria. But anyway, basically the aerobics, if they are providing food for the facultative, the microphiles, the aerotolerant, and all the way down the chain as they die. But the facultative are going to have an explosion of growth because, one, we have oxygenation happening, and since these guys reproduce faster in a slightly oxygenated environment where a little extra oxygen getting added to the mix makes them happy, they will really start to reproduce, and they will start to occupy a larger zone of your soil profile, right? So facultative bacteria over the eons have really, really, really evolved to be able to work with plants, like in some really cool environments. It's pretty neat. The rainforest is amazing. And the fluctuation between the facultative and obligate dominance is such that facultative bacteria have formed pretty unique relationships with plants from that region. So you should look into it sometime. There's a lot of information that can be learned from that region. Now, in America, we don't have the same process to regenerate our soils. We kind of do, it's all basically the same, but we're not so dependent on the facultative fungi, not fungi, facultative anaerobes to take care of the process. We can use obligate aerobic bacteria, and that has to do with the way our soil profiles are. Now that's not like 100% real, but in general, we have a diverse type of topography in the United States, and so in like our farmland in the plains and stuff, it would be more along this range, the slightly fungal dominant obligate anaerobes. That's what's going to exist in our top layers of soil that we want to work with. And that doesn't mean that these are not present. And these are definitely used. A big rainfall comes, these are coming up, but they're deeper in the profile. So for us, we've looked at this focusing on the aerobic side of things, the fungal dominant side of things for breaking things down. But there's a whole nother process that happens further down the column. And the further down the column you go, the more alien it is to these creatures. And that's us included, If we were over here, it would be the opposite. We would understand this better. But because we're over here looking at this, it's very alien. So it's not the first thought that comes in the mind. However, this side of the fence is so important to the successional process that without understanding it, I don't personally believe that you can truly understand regenerative agriculture. You can't understand the nuance of how things can be cyclical in nature, because it happens. It happens right below our feet. It happens in nature every day. There's a cycle, and it's a beautiful loop. And can't say closed loop, but it's a loop that is beautiful. And as we progress in these talks, we'll go into more details about all these, but I want to just get into the zones. So we've talked about the obligate aerobic bacteria and the facultative anaerobes, and how facultative anaerobes reproduced faster in the presence of atmospheric gases, but are not dependent on them. Then we have the microaerophiles. Microaerophiles are going to live in the zone that is pretty much between the obligate anaerobes and the obligate aerobes. Okay, so the obligate aerobes are the air-loving. These are the non-air-loving. These like it just in the middle. They like their little, to them, it's the Goldilocks zone. It's right in between, you know, where the perfect levels is. They need a little bit of air, but not too much. Okay? Excuse me. Different than the facultative in the sense that these do not increase reproduction rates in the presence of more oxygen, and it probably would become slightly toxic to them if they were too far up. They're pretty dependent. They like this zone. Okay. Then you have the aerotolerant bacteria. Aerotolerant bacteria are really cool. They can exist throughout the whole zone because they're not dependent on air, and air's not toxic to them. They don't seem to mind. They don't seem to care that it's there. So it's pretty much like just a non-thing to them, you know? So the aerotolerant bacteria move throughout the whole column. They're not affected by the presence of atmospheric gases. Then you've got the obligate anaerobes, which we've already talked about. Now, fungi enjoy this side of the spectrum, and their numbers can be higher in this environment. Bacteria, they happen to like this environment too, but they can thrive in lower oxygen levels. Fungi have a harder time. So the quantities of bacteria or fungi to bacteria, the ratios, all things being equal with moisture, the less air you get, the less fungi you're going to have, and the more bacteria you can have. Now, the processes that happen above feed the processes that occur below, because life feeds on life until you get into obligates. Now, until you get to the obligate anaerobes and some of the other things that happen here, they're pretty wild. They still feed on life, but there are chemical processes that occur where they actually take the chemicals in, and those are chemiotrophs. And we'll get into those later. But for now, I hope you enjoyed the little talk about the different zones that these 5 different types of bacteria and the basic fungal kingdom on top of the bacteria like to enjoy. So these 6 things, these 6 little types of things that like to live in our soils. Anyway, thanks for listening, and as always, keep growing and enjoy life. Talk to you later.